This, it's not the gun. That's according to a psychiatrist we talked with yesterday. And if you missed that, welcome back. It's Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News and Talk. And anytime you can you check out Bishop on Air on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and you'll be able to find segments of interviews that we've had and conversations that we've had on a whole host of issues, but in particular on the issue of firearms and the Second Amendment and the ongoing litigation and court hearings and the status of where we're at with all of that, especially in the state of Illinois. So we still are awaiting any kind of ruling from both the Illinois Supreme Court and the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals with challenges to Illinois' gun and magazine ban that was enacted January 10th of this year, prohibiting the sale, the purchase, possession of any semi-automatic weapons that fit the category of what state lawmakers defined as assault weapons, and also any magazines over capacity of more than 15 for handguns and more than 10 for rifles. There's also a registry component with that if the law is upheld in the courts, then January 1st, residents who owned one of these legislatively defined assault weapons will have to tell themselves to the state government, which some say is a violation of the Fifth Amendment, right, of not having to incriminate yourself. That's a challenge that has yet to be brought forward and fully litigated. Will that be brought forward in the months ahead as we approach the January 1st deadline to register? That's a question that has yet to surface, even though it has been filed by at least Thomas Magg. However, that has not been one of the issues that went to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. They're just looking at the Second Amendment issue. The Illinois Supreme Court has the case challenging the law on grounds of equal protection and special legislation, saying that you can't carve out, police officers and jail wardens and people that work in, private detectives or in private insurance. You can't carve them out and allow them to have access to commonly owned firearms while saying that the regular citizen cannot. So those are the distinctions between the federal appeals court case and the Illinois Supreme Court case, both of which are still pending. We don't know when exactly they're going to release those rulings in either court, so we'll be watching that closely. But the debate about increased violent crime, we see it in Chicago with regular street crime that seems to be reported ad nauseum, and it's horrible to hear those numbers with double digits on a weekend losing their lives because of individuals using a firearm to commit violence. And then you've got also the national conversation of mass shootings where somebody that appears to be mentally ill goes out and shoots people, just as we had on July 3rd in Philadelphia with an individual who apparently told police that he went out and shot up people at random to further elevate the problem of gun violence. And just a bizarre report that came out last week after that shooting. But let's hear some of the back and forth, right? And we'll start with the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which last month heard the challenge of Illinois' gun and magazine ban. And you had the Deputy Solicitor General at the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, Sarah Hunger, talking with the judges on that three panel. And I just want to revisit some of what that discussion centered around. In particular, one aspect of it. Here is Sarah Hunter and also the judge. I believe you'll hear Easterbrook in this, but let's just hear about a 3-minute exchange about what they say is the justification for Illinois' law.
That they're offensive, militaristic weapons. That's what they were designed for, and that's how they're being used today. That's why they're being regulated by the state and these localities, because they are the perfect instrument for lone shooters who with little to no training to take, an assault weapon and large capacity magazines and murder people in minutes, if not seconds. And that wreaks havoc not only on those who are present through injury and death, but also the entire communities. They're very traumatic events. There are economic consequences. It's also a very significant burden on law enforcement. And so what is happening is these mass shooters are using them in offensive ways because that is what they were designed for, although of course they were designed for the battlefield.
You're saying the state has a good reason for doing what it's doing. That's exactly what the means ends business is about. So how can we, given what Bruen said about means ends arguments. How can we consider this?
I think we can under the justifications prong of what is relevantly similar. The court specifically asked to look at the how and the why, which it noted included the justifications for the act. I understand that the court did also say that there cannot be any means end scrutiny. And so we are not asking the court to engage in any type of interest balancing or means end scrutiny. We are presenting the justification for this act, and we are saying that it is relevantly similar.
I hope you see you're just repeating the reason why I asked my question. You're asking us to consider through the back door something that Bruen bars at the front door. And I wonder whether that's consistent with our role as what the Constitution calls an inferior court.
Well, it is consistent with Bruen because there's another door in Bruen, which is the justifications. And I understand that that might be slightly contradictory for what the court would have said in Bruen, but it is what the court said. They did use the word justifications. And
so we not only get the two-part test that they expressly said was one part too many, but we also have the very same criteria that courts of appeals used before Bruen, even though they were expressly disapproved. Does your argument really hinge on this?
It does not really. It does not really hinge on this. But I would also note that the justifications, in the way that we see it, fits into the historical tradition approach. But no, our argument does not hinge on this because these are not weapons in common use for self-defense. They are dangerous and unusual, and they are consistent with the historical tradition whereby states, the federal government, and other localities will regulate a weapon once it has been introduced into society, once it proliferates to the point where it is causing harm, and then the state comes in to regulate in that respect. And so
that's the argument essentially the state's making in court, and the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals has this argument. When they will decide on this, we don't know, but there's plenty of other debate going on. We'll hear from Senator Dick Durbin about his thoughts of what Congress is doing. Then we'll hear reaction from other interviews we've done in the past week from Rhonda Ezell, chief plaintiff in the Ezell case that is used in a lot of the prosecution of gun laws. And also we'll hear from Carol Lieberman, a psychiatrist we chatted with yesterday. So that's coming up here on WMAY. So we heard the state's attorneys argue in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The justification, they say, is why Illinois banned more than 170 semi-automatic firearms and magazines over certain capacities. That was in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, and we're still waiting on what the court will do and whether or not it's going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. But other justification outside of the courts, you have U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, who last week was in Highland Park during the 4th of July parade, and also a remembrance of those who lost their lives in the mass shooting there. He laid out his justification for why there needs to be more gun control, saying that Congress has acted, but more needs to be done.
Well, after Uvalde last year, after Highland Park last year, Congress did do something. It's not nearly enough, and it doesn't address assault weapons, which I think is one of the key elements here if we're going to put an end to this gun violence and innocent people are being hurt and killed. But we are moving forward slowly. I wish it went more quickly.
So again, Senator Dick Durbin talking about how more needs to happen nationwide with a ban on semi-automatic firearms that he calls assault weapons. But what's really going on with the increase in violence and the mass shootings? Is it about the gun that's used? Is it about somebody having a rifle that has more than 10 rounds in the magazine? Is it about somebody who has a handgun that is more than 15 rounds in the magazine? Rhonda Ezell, who brought forward landmark cases challenging Chicago gun laws and bans on shooting ranges, for instance. She was successful in those challenges, and her case is being used as precedent in a lot of instances where laws are being challenged in various states, including here in Illinois. But she reacted to this whole idea of the focus being focusing only on the firearm and prohibiting individuals who are law-abiding from accessing semi-automatic firearms. This is a little bit from when we chatted last week.
There's no way that you can tell me or tell anyone in this country that violent crime is an epidemic, and then you don't want to hold the individuals responsible for their actions, meaning that you don't want to incarcerate anyone. If you don't want to go to jail, don't commit crime. Yes, there are plenty of availability for community activities for these kids. They have an opportunity to go to school and stay in school from the beginning. These people aren't special. They make the decisions to be gang members and drug dealers and killers and whatever else they want to call themselves. Again, it's all political. It's all politicized. These things have been happening for decades and decades, for eons. And no one has stopped the violence because it helps their little political goal. So if we're talking about stopping violence, then we have to hold people accountable. There's no way that you can sit here and see the numbers that we saw on Memorial Day weekend, the 4th of July weekend, and every single day for that matter, or every weekend in the city of Chicago and around the country, and say that, well, we don't think incarceration is the answer, but yet you run to gun control that does nothing to stop the violence, and it only affects law-abiding Americans. And we're not the ones that's out here committing the crime. These people are mentally ill. They need some help. They're not getting it, but the government is pushing some radical notion that these people can go out here, commit these violent crimes, and if it's good enough for them, then they never let a crisis go unused. So, they're at to blame just as well as the criminals because they're allowing these things to happen.
So again, Rhonda Ezell, just a gun rights advocate, talking about her understanding of what's behind the efforts to have more gun control. And she says that instead of focusing on the gun, people need to look at the overall issue of addressing criminals and holding criminals accountable. But back to the question of, is it the gun? We chatted with Carol Lieberman. She's a licensed psychiatrist. And if you missed that conversation, you can find it entirely at my YouTube channel. Just search Bishop on Air and you'll be able to find it. But yesterday, she laid out, Carol Lieberman laid out that it's not the firearm that's causing these nationwide stories of mass casualty violent crime. She says that it is indeed about mental illness, and something that's very troubling when it comes to how to fully address this.
Well, first of all, the answer isn't gun control. I can definitely say that. It's not about the guns. Certainly there have been lots of stabbing incidents. I mean, people who want to kill people find a way. But a lot of people who are committing crimes, especially crimes where there are more than one person killed or injured, it does have to do with mental illness. And that the reason why there are so many more mentally ill people walking the streets and committing crimes is because of the psychiatric hospitals. State and county psychiatric hospitals have been closed. It's been a while now, and that's where many of these people would have been were these hospitals not closed. There isn't enough room in the more acute hospitals that there are left. And even if people do get admitted there, they are kept it's on a 72-hour hold. And so after 3 days, they are released. And of course, 3 days is not enough to treat someone with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And so they give them a prescription, send them on their way. And when the prescription runs out, they don't go to the local clinics and so on, which was what was envisioned for them when they closed the hospitals. And then, of course, COVID made things worse. The lockdowns actually made things worse because people weren't allowed to, go out and go see doctors. It was much harder to be able to continue to get treatment.
So again, Carol Lieberman, a psychiatrist, highlighting some of the instances of violent crime with, higher number of fatalities, and saying that it's a mental illness issue. And also part of our conversation, which again, go check that out, Bishop on Air on YouTube. It's the focus on making sure families are there for those who are suffering from mental illness, and ensuring that the families know when to speak out and have somebody come in and intervene if somebody is experiencing a deeper level of psychosis. And that is something that we need more awareness of and more understanding of and more resources for. And is the state of Illinois giving all of those resources necessary and making that the major focus of this effort to try to tamp down on violent crime? Yeah, there's some funds here and there, a little bit of focus here and there, but instead the state took a broad measure and made a law that prohibits the possession and sale of semi-automatic firearms to everybody, not just to those who may be considered a danger to themselves or others, to everybody. Regardless. So interesting to see where we're at in this debate, and I don't think the debate's going to go anywhere.